This is a short overview of the role of government, which seems like a key area for study in political science. In this overview, I'm going to talk about its form and function, what it does, and how it. So first, the role of government. What do governments do? Generally speaking, the smallest common denominator for all governments all over the world is that they have the legal monopoly of violence on a given territory. That sounds a bit rough, but that's basically what governments do, a state does. It's a bureaucratic entity that is allowed to impose its rules on the rest of society legally, backed up by violence. And that from that arises all these tasks that governments do. They regulate society, act as the society's referee, for better or worse. Obviously, there are differences in how this power is handled between dictatorships and democracies. They handle security, and in most democracies, some kind of welfare for the citizens. And a good question here is, of course, what would life be like without a government? The process of government is basically done according to rules. So these rules help us understand government structures. They help us understand how decisions are being made. They help us to agree on how the government should be run, the system should be run. And they make these systems predictable, and they give the system legitimacy. Now, rules will vary by countries. So each country is unique in its own set of rules. The goals of government, generally speaking, they tend to have 5 objectives. To maintain independence and stability in some sense. Now, independence is a bit of a tricky word because in the 21st century, a whole lot of governments are interconnected and interdependent. So it gets complicated, but there is some kind of sense of sovereignty. Maintaining the legitimacy of the political system is another thing that the government tries to maintain, because if the political system loses legitimacy, there can very well be upheaval, and there have been examples of very troubling outcomes. Of course, it has to adapt to changes and integrate interests and needs in all parts of the countries and set political goals. The government has a set of tools at its disposal for doing all of this. And generally speaking, we can speak of 3 types of tools: economic, regulatory, and programmatic. The economic tools would include economic management, so you can take resources from one part of the country or from one source in the country and put them in other bodies with few strings attached. In Canada, we have something called equalization payments that are very much like that. Governments can also provide aid and subsidies. So take resources from one source and give to another body, but have strings attached. There are examples in most countries of this: subsidies to economic sectors like fisheries and car manufacturers, or resource exploration. These have to be done according to particular rules. So if you're working in the fisheries, for instance, there will be in many countries a whole set of rules and regulations and forms that the entrepreneur will have to fulfill to get the aid and to get the subsidy. So you're not going to just walk up to the desk and say, I work in the fisheries, give me some money. You have to fulfill certain objectives, and very often you have to spend them in particular, spend the money that you get in particular ways and show receipts and so on and so forth. There are also regulatory tools. Governments make the rules. These are institutional, bureaucratic. They regulate how the law works, how the economy works, social and political affairs. And this is everything from traffic rules to safety standards in particular professions, or how you build houses, to zoning laws, to criminal justice. And finally, there is the programmatic tool. So governments can take a more active role and more interventionist role in society. They can create free trade agreements, or they can deliver healthcare or social programs. And the debate on exactly how that should be done and if it should be done, is something that happens in every election cycle in most countries. And that's an overview of the role of government in its form and its function.